Hello, I'm Jim Burress, host of All Things Considered on WABE. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the debate for Georgia Supreme Court. Let's meet the candidates. John Barrow served in the U.S. Congress representing District 12 for 10 years and was a pro bono attorney for Atlanta Legal Aid Society. Andrew Pinson was appointed to the Georgia Court of Appeals in 2021 by Governor Brian Kemp. Kemp then appointed him to the Georgia Supreme Court in 2022. Now, Justice Pinson declined to participate in the debate and is thus represented by an empty podium. Now let's meet our panelists. Rosie Manins is a legal affairs reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Cedra Mayfield is a litigation reporter for the Daily Report. Now, for complete rules on today's program, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. And also, before we start the program, we want to make sure that viewers are aware that due to the Georgia Code of Judicial Conduct, the Atlanta Press Club understands the candidate may not be able to answer questions about how he may rule on specific cases or topics. If the candidate is asked a question he feels may violate this code, he will let us know, and we will not be expecting an answer from that candidate. You will find the code on the debate page of the Atlanta Press Club website. To start the program, the candidate will be asked one question by each panelist. He will have 60 seconds to answer their questions. Rosie Manins, you get the first question to John Barrow.
Good afternoon, Congressman. You've taken a public stance on the issue of abortion rights, and you've made that quite a central part of your election campaign. So I'm curious how voters can trust that you will be impartial and set aside your personal beliefs when it comes to deciding cases that would come before you if you were a judge.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because partiality has nothing to do with your opinions about the law. As the word implies, the root word implies, it entails feelings about the parties, being in favor of one party or another. The United States Supreme Court explained this a good while back when they said impartiality of the sort that judges should strive for means you're not going to favor one party over another, but that doesn't mean that you're open-minded on free speech, or you're open-minded on due process, or you're open-minded on basic concepts of the law. Every person who's expected to be a judge has to have strong feelings about the law. If he doesn't, he's not qualified to serve on the court. And if he does have feelings about issues, important issues that everybody has an opinion about, and he keeps them to himself, he has no business asking for your vote.
Senator Mayfield, please ask your question to Mr. Barrow.
Congressman, in the more than 40 years that you've been licensed to practice law, you've been an attorney, a congressman, and a candidate for both the Secretary of State and for the Supreme Court of Georgia. Your opponent has fewer years of professional experience, but more years of judicial experience, having served on both the Georgia Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court of Georgia. Based on experience, why should voters elect you to the Supreme Court?
I think experience as a judge is meaningless if you haven't got experience in life. You haven't got life experience representing real people who have real problems in the real world. By those qualifications, bringing to the group a background of experience that they don't have, it's no contest between me and my opponent. He has a couple of years' experience in the real world as a pampered associate in a Wall Street law firm. I've had 25 years of practice as a partner in a small firm in a small town, representing families all over the state of Georgia, trying cases all over the state of Georgia, trying to help people who need help, working again with real people with real problems. My opponent can't say that. He's never done anything like that in his life. As far as anybody knows, he's never tried a case to a jury in his life. So I think the experience that counts on the court is not the experience you start with when you show up there without any background. It's the background experience you bring to it. There's only one reason to have more than one member on a court, and that's to bring a different body of experience to the group. My opponent brings virtually none from the real world. I bring lots.
And that concludes the first round. Now, in the second round, the candidates question each other. Since Andrew Pinson declined to participate, John Barrow, you may pose a question to the empty podium. You will also have 30 seconds to provide a rebuttal to what you believe your opponent would have said.
My opponent's excuse for not being here is that he's not allowed to answer any questions about issues that might come before him as a judge. And that's not true, and he knows it. The Georgia Code of Judicial Conduct specifically states that it does not prohibit a judge from publicly stating his views on disputed issues. And that's because, over 20 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court stated that any rule that tries to stop a judge from talking about what he thinks about issues that might appear from him is unconstitutional. So now that we've shown that the excuse for skipping this debate is completely bogus, I'll ask the question of my opponent that I would have asked if he was here today. I believe that the Georgia abortion ban violates the state constitution. It is unconstitutional under our state constitution. What do you think?
And what do you believe his answer would have been?
I don't know what his answer would have been, but I can tell you what the response is.
Please.
The response is that the silence you just heard is deafening. But it's good to know that actions speak louder than words, because my opponent has already voted to uphold the Georgia abortion ban in virtually every way that a lawyer can. He defended the ban in federal court for years, even while Roe versus Wade was on the books. He was the chief appellate lawyer for the state of Georgia when Georgia joined Alabama and Mississippi in the case that overturned Roe versus Wade. So his record speaks for himself, even if he won't. And the only thing worse than his record is that he's too chicken to come here and stick up for himself.
All right, well, that concludes our second round. You're watching the debate for Georgia Supreme Court. Now, Andrew Pinson declined to participate and is thus represented by an empty podium. We now go back to our panel to ask questions to Mr. Barrow until we run out of time. Cedra Mayfield, you get the first question.
Thank you. So as it stands today, the Supreme Court of Georgia consists of 9 justices, 2 of which female minorities. With regards to judicial diversity, do you consider the Supreme Court of Georgia to be diverse? And how would your presence on the High Court help to diversify the bench?
Well, you know, diversity is as diversity does. If you all have the same background, either as junior judges or as junior prosecutors, no matter how diverse you may be on the outside, you don't really bring different life experiences and different values to the deliberations of the group. And again, the only reason for having more than one member on the court is so that you can bring other perspectives and other experience to bear on the decisions the court has to decide as a group. And I think there's not enough diversity on the court, frankly, that it needs to have in order to do its job properly. It needs more people on there who have real-world experience, litigating with lawyers all over the state in a small-town practice, earning your living by representing folks dealing with the hardest problems they'll have to deal with. Have a lot of experience also beyond just practicing law, and that's in the realm of public service. There's hardly anybody on the court who's got much in the way of public experience, a couple of people, but nobody has the wealth of public experience either as a local elected official or as a member of Congress that I have. That can only help the court do its job.
Rosie Manins, it's your turn to ask a question.
Thank you. Congressman, there are 4 justices of the Georgia Supreme Court who are up for election this year. I'm curious why you chose to challenge Justice Pinson and if it has anything to do with the fact that he is the youngest and the newest member of the court.
No, but it does have something to do with the fact that he has a record on the issue that I think is the most salient issue today, and that's women's rights. It is certainly not the only issue the court's going to deal with, but it is a particularly representative sample of the tension between the legislature and the people's rights. It's a very salient issue right now, and he has a record on the issue. I think the question we ought to be asking is why aren't other people challenging other justices on the court? And I think you'll find the reason why is people are scared to do so. You got to take on more than just one justice if you're going to run. If you have something to lose, you can't afford to do it. We have lots of problems with our judiciary. The main problem we got is that they're not accountable to the people voting in nonpartisan elections. Instead, they're accountable to the partisan politicians who appoint them to office. And, you know, you don't have to believe there's some sort of conspiracy to believe that. You just can't help but carry forward the political agenda of the politicians who appoint you. And if everybody on our appellate courts gets on the court that way, it's not a good thing. We should have more people elected to judicial office by the people in nonpartisan elections like this one. Better to ask why somebody else isn't running against some of the others than to say why I'm running against. I can only run against one at a time.
All right. And Cedra Mayfield, your turn to ask a question again.
Congressman, as artificial intelligence continues to become more mainstream, a divide is brewing about whether and how AI should exist in the legal sector. In what, if any, capacities do you think artificial intelligence could or should be utilized by a judge?
I'm very apprehensive about the use of artificial intelligence. You'd have to fact check and cite site check every single authority you might get from something that's devising something on the basis of an algorithm. I don't know how it'd be done. I know as a court, we're going to have to address that issue because lawyers are going to be relying on that tool as a starting point for a lot of their work. And I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but I know this: just because something is new doesn't make it safe, and just because something's old doesn't mean it's bad. We got to work on this as a team on the court to make sure that we're getting accurate information, accurate citations of authority, and that we're not letting the machines do our thinking for us.
Rosie Manins, it's your turn once again to ask a question.
As far as anyone can tell, in the history of the Georgia Supreme Court, no incumbent justice has lost an election that they have run for. And I'm curious to find out what your thoughts are on the advantage that an incumbent has in a nonpartisan judicial election, and also how you can overcome that advantage, if there is one, when you don't have party lines to rely on, when a voter may not have, that partisan sort of inkling about who you would be as a judge.
I'm not sure partisan elections would help one bit. It would probably further polarize the judiciary than it already is. I like the idea of having nonpartisan elections to elect our judges. The problem is we don't have enough of them. They're rarer than hen's teeth. Nobody runs against incumbent judges to begin with, and those that do are oftentimes running as a sort of a vanity campaign. We really need to have more people stepping up who've got something to offer and who realize that the appointment process, the process where we rely on partisan officials to appoint all of our elected judges, is going to polarize and inject partisan politics into the court without anybody realizing it. The best check on that process, and it's a natural tendency, is to have more elections where people are chosen on the basis of nonpartisan elections, focusing on issues like the issue that I think is the salient issue of this election, and that is whether or not a woman has the same rights under the state constitution that she used to have under Roe versus Wade. I think she does. My opponent does not.
I have a question for you. Chief Justice Melton stepped down in recent years, in part because of the pay of the Supreme Court. Do you believe that the pay for justices is adequate?
I believe it is. I believe the opportunity to serve is what attracts people of quality to the bench. And the opportunity to be of service is the most important qualification that you offer as a person who wants to run or serve on the Supreme Court. You don't do it for the money. If you're doing it for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reason.
All right, and that is all the time that we have for individual questions. John Barrow, you will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement.
I believe that women have the same rights today under our state constitution that they used to have under Roe versus Wade. And that means that our current abortion ban in Georgia is unconstitutional under our state constitution. My opponent disagrees with that, does not believe that. I think that the most important thing that we can do is to make sure that women's rights are protected in the next Supreme Court. My opponent's not here to defend himself and to say what he believes. I said what I believe. I think he's doing that because he's afraid to face the music. Not exactly a profile in courage, if you ask me. But if you do not want politicians to be making the most personal and hardest medical decisions that you will ever make, then I ask for your vote, and I'd be proud to have your support.
Thank you. That concludes our program. We would like to remind voters that early voting begins April 29th and Election Day is Tuesday, May the 21st. Our thanks to John Barrow and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's program. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club debates, just visit atlantapressclub.org. I'm Jim Burress. Thank you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Take care.